and thank you to everyone. This is a great panel, and I'm looking forward to contributing. Hopefully, you can see the slides here. What I want to talk about today, well, let me actually give my disclosures. So I have no industry disclosures, but funding acknowledgements. Thank you to everyone who supported this work. And as Mason said, I direct a lab. Our motto is every story is a brain story. And we really think about the legal and ethical and policy dimensions of this sort of work. And here's what I've heard this morning. So it's neat to go at the end because I sort of collected some thoughts. These are almost verbatim quotes. You'll have to forgive me. I was typing quickly, but there's a lot of research to be done, opportunities for research, a lot more work to be done here, experience, a key to intervention. And I mention all this because I think what's clear is that more research is needed. And here is my takeaway, the thing that I want to talk about today. As we get and need more and more research, both now and in the future, we need to think, anticipate, identify, address the ethical, legal, and social implication challenges and the equity, diversity, and inclusion challenges that will accompany that research. So I want to talk a little bit about field-based psychiatry and neuroscience research. I want to connect it to challenges that are going to emerge, I think, in the context of psychedelic psychiatric research. And then just a couple slides at the end, sort of some thoughts about how we move towards solutions, though that's more for discussion. So let me talk about field-based psychiatry and neuroscience. The basic idea is this: if you could get data in the field instead of just in the lab or the hospital, and if you can analyze that data, and we've already heard from some of these great speakers about how this is happening, analyze that data with advanced models, including using artificial intelligence and machine learning, you get an improved understanding of whether and how and the mechanisms of how these psychedelic interventions are working. The idea of field-based data and field-based research in neuroscience and in psychiatry is really new. It's not new to anthropologists or sociologists or historians maybe, or others in the field, but for the most part, today, research and clinical practice in psychiatry is geographically constrained. You get these images that are shown on the left of the doctor's office, the hospital, the MRI scanner in the basement of the hospital. And I like this idea because if you're a participant, it's like you have to be there, right? You have to be, when you enroll in the trial, close to the facility. But what's happening in many areas, and it's relevant for our conversation today, is that you really can go anywhere with your research because of wearables and implantables. These are just a variety of devices. Obviously, I don't advocate for any one particular one. The idea is that the world is being opened up to research. Now, that's a good thing, but we're going to talk about how maybe there are some current concerns. I'll quickly just mention, again, what's already sort of been foreshadowed and what you've heard, that the idea of, when I think of a deep biobehavioral typing, it's something that Dr. Rauch, a phrase that I borrowed from him, or deep genophenotyping, we're doing real-time data measures, which can include all sorts of stuff, including imaging, interviews, other phenotypic data, genotype as well, genotype, and then epigenetic and environmental data. And this stuff, there's a lot of it. Here's just a list. I won't even read them all, but text messages, GPS, screen capture, accelerometer data, sleep, wake, your diet, glucose monitoring, potentially brain activity, and more and more and more. And it's not just that we can do more, it's that some of the things that we can do are even more impressive. And I just want to mention one because it's an area that I've worked in with colleagues, and that's the dawn of new portable, accessible MRI. There are also a lot of other types of new neurotechnology, so it's not just MR. But this is, I think, striking because, again, for the entirety of its existence, in order to get an MRI scan, you got to go into the big research facility with this heavy and immobile scanner. And what's happening today is that there are new technologies. Here's just one example. This is a picture and tweets from Shen. It's at Brown and Gates Foundation, and they've got the Scanavan. You can see it there. This van can go around. They do work on infants and look at brain development, but it's not hard to imagine, and given the emphasis on neuroimaging in psychedelics research, to go into the field and do this research, and rather than have someone come in, take the van and the scanner to that individual. When doing so, and I just love this quote, it can also go international. Most of my comments today will be about focusing on the domestic context, but international can matter as well. And this says, we needed to construct a whole building for our first MRI, This is a device called Hyperfine, a low field, ultra low field MRI. It fit in a cupboard. So this stuff is happening, and there are lots of reasons to be excited about field-based psychedelic research. Here are a few. It could potentially, we've already heard this word today, increase access by reaching remote and marginalized populations. It could allow you to do more monitoring of participants in real life environments in real time as they're interacting socially. And as we've heard, that's really important, both to the objectives of the treatments and to the treatments themselves. You can gather more objective data, data that the participant may not even be aware of. You can do it at greater frequency, and you can potentially develop real-time interventions, right? Modify this as it's happening in the field. All exciting, but what I want to point out is that as exciting as it is, there are also a number of challenges that we should anticipate and be ready for, rather than sort of wait until they happen and then say, oh, we should have thought about that. So I'm going to talk about these, but I want to first acknowledge a bunch of collaborators. I'll just put them on the slides. I don't have time to mention them. These are a lot of the folks, and thank you to McLean for this conference and really for facilitating a lot of the work that I do. Dr. Rauch, Silverman, Dr. Baker, and our colleagues Patrick and Sarah. We are going to be thinking about these sorts of issues this spring at a Radcliffe seminar. Thank you to Radcliffe. Intimate data, right? Ensuring equity as psychiatry, and today psychedelic research embraces boundless data and AI. The other thing I just want to point out is I've been doing this work with many colleagues on portable MRI and the ethics. Again, it takes more than a village, right? It takes an international interdisciplinary working team to kind of generate a lot of these ideas. So these things I'm going to talk about, these concerns, they're not just things that I've thought about. I really want to give credit to the many others who've raised these sorts of issues. So I just thought what I'd do is go back to some of those promises I mentioned and just raise some questions about potential peril. So increasing access sounds great, and it would sure seem like, boy, if we can get more mobile technology, we can be out there and break down barriers, and more people can participate in the research, and more people can benefit from the interventions. But let's put a pause. Is that going to happen? So just in creating the technologies and creating the research designs, what does the workforce look like? Is it sufficiently diverse and inclusive? What about recruitment and retention? What do the studies look like? Are there publications yet just identifying the demographics of those participating in these initial studies? And with very limited resources initially, how will those decisions be made? And then access. We just heard about some of these amazing new opportunities for access, and yet, boy, I was kind of listing all the things I'd have to do, right? Have enough money to get the technology, show up repeatedly. There are a lot of barriers as well that we ought to be thinking about and addressing. Here's another promise, right? Is that it's really exciting if we can monitor participants in real life environments, but it raises a lot of research concerns. So what about return of results? Return of results has traditionally thought of as something that happens towards the end of a study, but you could potentially return results here in real time, raw data, processed data, interpreted data. Indeed, it might even be part of the research. When will you return results? I heard this phrase, what if they're in a certain state or headspace or mind space? Do you return it then? Do you wait? Of course, there are many issues related to privacy and consent. That deserves an entire other talk, so I'll just mention it. And I'll just raise the possibility, and I'll come back to this at the very end, coming from a law school, that some of this data could find its way into criminal or civil legal proceedings. And is the research team ready to handle that? The idea that you can get more objective data is really important, and you can get it at much greater frequency. But it's going to raise some novel questions. For instance, what if there are conflicts between subjective experience and what the objective data are saying? And is there a pathway and capacity for communication? I mean, on the research side, you have the capacity. I know everyone in this call is really teched up. You can take all this data and you've got awesome teams to analyze it. And then how is that going to be communicated to the participant? And then these AI identified patterns, to the extent that AI is playing a role here, are there appropriate ways to ensure that it's fair and not biased? Just one more point, and again, there's so many questions I could raise. I just want to raise a few more on real-time interventions. There are going to be opportunities here, new ones, as there's monitoring in real time for reporting, for thinking about incidental findings, and these ideas sort of have to be in place, the policies, and I'm sure they will be, but it's important to think about. And this last one, I just want to draw on for a moment. I've heard a lot of conversation today about expanding opportunities to access these psychedelic interventions. And that means accessing them in a lot of cultural context. And we need to think carefully about whether the interventions are culturally sensitive and appropriate, even as a matter of efficacy, given, again, the intimate relationship between social environment and the intervention. All right, so those are just some of the many issues, but let me close on just a note of kind of where do we go from here? And I think it's pretty clear, actually, that we don't know where the research is headed. It's an early stage, an exciting early stage, and about to really get big. And so I want to, give credit to Petrie Film Center and Mason Marks and Glenn Cohen for doing what I think is the next step, which is doing what we're doing in our highly portable MRI context, as used as an example, evidence-based consensus recommendations with the relevant stakeholders, community participants. I really think that's what has to happen here. And now is the moment. I mean, it was really this is the exact moment to pull these groups together and to think about and anticipate these issues. So in closing, I just want to say, and I have to do this, I don't know if I'm required by my law school, but I just feel like, we can't forget about the law here. And the reason is what Mason said at the very beginning. This entire area of research, it wasn't stymied by like a technological limitation. It was stymied by what I do, the law. And it could be stymied again, or it could be complicated. And I think, again, at this stage, we really want to think about how are we going to end up in a year, in 2 years, in 5, or however long it takes, or maybe tomorrow, with more effective, efficient, and just legal regulation of psychedelic research and use. To get there, I think what we've heard today, this more individualized, personalized data is going to be relevant. And of course, we need more technological capacity, which is about what this panel is about. And what I'll just end with are these two additions. So to go from the technology to the data requires consideration of the ELSI and the EDI issues. And to go from once you have the data and you've got the analysis and you have treatments that you think work, you can't stop there, right? You've got to engage with us in law and policy. We have to work together to develop these evidence-based policies. Again, Mason said, there aren't standards, there aren't guidelines yet. And there certainly isn't training and implementation on the legal and the policy side. You put all that together, and I think you can get to this final spot. And I think today's project and program is a really nice step there. So thank you. My psychedelic thank you slide on that. It's the best I could do, and look forward to the conversation.